Okay, hi everybody. Today we are going to talk about the women's rights movement. That is section 1 of chapter 32. So let's go ahead and get started. So the women's movement didn't begin in the 1970s. What we had at that point was the second wave. Now historians look back and they see three different waves of feminism in the United States. The first one, they believe, occurred before the Civil War. Excuse me, at this time, women were very active, mostly in abolition, also prohibition, but they were also advocating for the right to vote. So they protested, and eventually they're going to get this in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. And that kind of marks the end of the first wave of feminism. But something occurred during that time, which brings us to the second wave of feminism, and that was the writing of the Equal Rights Amendment. The person who wrote this was Alice Paul. She was kind of known as a militant protester during this wave of feminism, because she and others would go right out in front of the White House and they would protest against Wilson to try to get the 19th Amendment, and it paid off. Well, anyway, she wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, which we're going to talk about later in the section. One woman who helped to really fuel the second wave of feminism was this woman right here, Betty Friedan. She had attended Smith College, which was a private women's college, and she went back for a reunion, and she started asking women, are you satisfied with your lives, and what do you do with your life? And most women were dissatisfied, and most of them were housewives. They were stay-at-home, they were not professionals. And so this kind of encouraged her to write this book. It was The Feminine Mystique in 1963. And basically, she talked about the dissatisfaction that so many people had, women, about their lives, and that they just didn't feel fulfilled. And this caused a lot of women to question their own roles in society and want to seek more. They thought that maybe there was something wrong with them, that they were just discontent and everybody else was happy and they should be happy. So anyway, a lot of women started to read this book. It sold over 1 million copies, and it kind of started more and more women to demand change, right? They wanted some change in life. In many cases, they were subservient to the men. They waited on them hand and foot. And this probably isn't the case in your home, but I remember my mom my dad say, hey, give me another cup of coffee, or hey, bring me my dinner in here, or doing something like that. And it seemed like it was perfectly natural. That will not fly nowadays in most homes, right? It doesn't happen. Okay, so women had historically been continuing to enter the workforce outside of the home. Some of the first people to work in the textile mills in the United States were women at the Lowell mills. In places, Connecticut and other places, and this is in the early 1800s. And then during the Civil War, they did work. During World War I, World War II, they just increased their numbers in the workforce. But one thing that wasn't happening is that they weren't getting increased pay. They received lower wages, and so this was going to become an issue in the 1960s. If you look down here at the fifth bullet point to the left, in 1960, women received 40% less pay than men, and as it says in your textbook, employers said, well, we can pay women less because they will accept less. And so that was kind of the common theme at the time. And you can see here, though, there is a trajectory where women's pay is increasing quite a bit, and it's getting closer, but a lot of women want to close that pay gap so that men and women get equal pay for equal work. All right, so during the Kennedy administration, unlike Johnson, he didn't hire a lot of women for his administration. We all know he liked women, right? But anyway, through executive order, he did state that hiring in his administration would be based on ability, not on an individual's sex, whether they were male or female. So what he did, he supported and he signed the Equal Pay Act. This really didn't have much impact at all, because if you see right here, it didn't include women who worked in agriculture or in professional fields or in service industries. And you might wonder, well, what did it pertain to? You have to think it's like at a factory. If you're doing the same thing in a factory as a man, then you should be getting the same pay. So it was that sort of thing. This really is not seen as a big victory for women, but it is seen as an important first step. And a lot of women use that to go back and recoup some lost wages in the past. Another thing that was created, though, by Kennedy was the President's Committee on the Status of Women. It was supposed to go out and investigate. What was going on, if women were suffering from discrimination, that sort of thing. And they wanted it called for equal opportunity in hiring, right? So this is what the goal of this was supposed to be. One thing, though, that was created, and this was by a fluke, in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this guy, Howard Smith of Virginia, remember we talked about this during the chapter 31, this guy put this in there, say you can't not discriminate in hiring based upon sex, believing that this would prevent the Civil Rights Act from passing because he didn't want it to, right? But what it said, it outlawed sexual discrimination in employment, and it also created this Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, right? And there's the emblem for that commission there on the left. But anyway, what they were supposed to do is make sure that all these companies and agencies were abiding by the law, and they weren't discriminating against people based upon their sex in hiring. Okay, so one organization that was frustrated with the EEOC was National Organization for Women. Actually, it formed as a result of that. They felt that this agency wasn't really addressing the sexual discrimination that was taking place. And so they got together and they formed NOW, the National Organization for Women. And what they wanted was economic equality for women and social equality for women. One of the first presidents was Betty Friedan, and she was also its co-founder. But what they were trying to do was pressure government officials, politicians, and everybody to make laws that promoted full equality for women. Another thing that they did in 1967 was, a year after they were formed, was endorse the legalization of abortion. That was the first organization for women to do so. There were some women, though, who didn't agree with NOW. They thought that NOW was a little bit too moderate and they should take a more aggressive approach to this, very similar to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who some of the members had been a part of during the Civil Rights Movement. So they influenced women like Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem, this woman here to the right, the white woman with the glasses, she was educated at Smith College too, just like Betty Friedan. And she got a job with New York Magazine, where she came across and she met people who were like-minded as she was. And so she started to be a little bit more assertive in writing about women's issues and articles, and encouraging women to unite, to make a powerful movement of protest for women's rights. And so she was a co-founder of the National Women's Political Caucus. And their main goal wasn't just to influence politicians, they wanted to be politicians. So it encouraged women to run for public office, right? So they worked to do that. If you look up here at this first bullet point, you can see that one of their methods, this is an example that was given in the book, they disrupt the Miss America pageant. People were frustrated with that pageant, women were, because they believed that it was the objectification of women, and they thought that women, it was beneath women to do that. So we see that some laws were starting to be affected that did, in fact, improve the lives of women. One of them was the Educational Amendments Act of 1972. Just like African Americans, many women weren't being enrolled or admitted into colleges and universities. And so what this says is, it said that they outlawed discrimination, sexual discrimination in higher education, and this amended a previous act of 1965. It was supposed to make sure that women not only were admitted, but also hired to work in these institutions. One part of this was Title IX. Title IX of the Education Amendment Act, it stated, and it says here specifically, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. What this meant is that at colleges, universities, high schools, where the federal government is giving them money, they can't benefit one sex or over the other. And I know when my mom was in high school, the only athletic activity that she had just an option to was tennis. Right? They didn't have anything for girls at that time, at least in her school. So this is more for athletics, right? So if you look up here in high school participation, women opposed to men, the percent increase of women involved with athletic participation went up 904%. And in colleges and universities, it's 456%. And that's due largely to this Education Amendments Act and Title IX. Okay, another thing that many women see as a step forward for their cause is the Supreme Court case Roe versus Wade. This was in 1973, and what it did is it legalized abortion. If you look at the bullet point over there, there was a woman by the name of Norma McCorvey. She was from Texas, and in Texas, it was illegal to get an abortion during the first trimester, actually anytime, unless it was for the mother's, to save the mother's life, right? So she wanted to get an abortion, and she went to court to argue for it. When with such a case like this being so personal, she's given a different name, right? Rather than Norma Corby, she uses a pseudonym, Jane Roe. In Georgia, if you look down at the second to last bullet point, there was another case, Doe, right? Doe versus Bolton, kind of a very similar case down there. So anyway, she went to court and she argued against the district attorney, and the district attorney, his name was Henry Wade, right? And so it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and at the time, the Supreme Court, it ruled 7-2 in favor of her. They said that prohibiting a woman from getting or obtaining an abortion violated her 14th Amendment right. I think they included other amendments in there as well. Basically, they said that the government doesn't have the right to interfere between a woman and her doctor, right? And that a woman could access abortion during her first trimester. Over the years, this is going to change because there are going to be other rulings and then other laws that challenge it in various states. There are people who are opposed to abortion, though, and they're opposed to it because they believe that, okay, so you might be upholding the rights of the mother. What about the rights of this unborn child? What right do they have? And isn't it a human right to have life? So they argue against it. In the picture right here, this was recently, there was a Supreme Court case, I think it came out of Georgia, where you have pro-life advocates with pro-abortion people up there arguing right there, right in front of the Supreme Court at the same time. Okay, if you look at abortions statistically in recent time, the World Health Organization, they say that there's about 40 to 50 million abortions that are performed every year. So that would be about 125,000 a day. And then in the United States, the Center for Disease Control said in 2016 there were 623,471 abortions, right? This was a decrease by 2% from the year before. Most of the women who get abortions are in their 20s, and most of them do it during their first trimester, in the early gestation period. You can see there's a chart, there are two charts over here. To the left, there's a breakdown, 2014. You can see actually where it started to shoot up right after the Roe v. Wade decision, and then ever since then it's been going down to about where it was when that Supreme Court decision was made. The chart on the bottom shows who's getting the abortion, right, and at what age. They have teenagers, still women within their 20s are the highest number who get them. All right, now remember I talked about the Equal Rights Amendment in that first wave of feminism when it was written. What it was supposed to be, it just was supposed to say that there is no discrimination based on sex and men and women should be treated equal. So this was introduced in 1923, right? And then it was revived during the second wave of feminism in the 1960s. It went before the House of Representatives and it was passed. Bella Abzug, who I'll talk about later, she's on the right here, the lady with the hat. She was always known for her hats. But anyway, she was a congresswoman from New York, and then also Gloria Steinem, leading feminist, and then also Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystique. They advocate and it helps its passage. It was approved then in the Senate in 1972. So it met the prerequisites for an amendment to be proposed. Then it has to go out to the states to be ratified. And you need 38 states for ratification. So it goes out there. I think Hawaii was the first state that ratified it, and then quite a few others followed, right? So in 1972, a total of 22 state legislators ratified the amendment, and 8 more joined in 1973. But then, if you look between 74 and 77, only 5 more states approved it. So they ended up getting, I think, 35, and then they needed 38. Some of the states that had ratified it revoked it, and then it expired in March of 1979. I saw something the other day where Virginia ratified it. So other states, I know Illinois had ratified it, so people want to bring it back in, but others question, what is it? What does it mean? So there is a lot of opposition to this because it is so vague. The woman on the right is a woman by the name of Phyllis Schlafly. I think she died back in 2016. But she was a leading opponent of it, and she kind of led the way. She created this organization called the Eagle Forum. They called her the most articulate and successful opponent of the radical feminist movement, right? So anyway, she argued against the Equal Rights Amendment because she said this hurts families. If you are a stay-at-home mother and your husband dies, does that mean that you're not going to get Social Security? You know, you've stayed home and worked and your husband's gone. Will you not get Social Security? You know, does this mean that we're going to have unisex bathrooms, that women are going to be drafted into the military? But more importantly, probably, is what rights are going to be taken away from women. If men and women are considered equal, then women, will they have to forfeit alimony if there's a divorce, even though they've been a homemaker the whole time? Will they get child support in the case of divorce? So she went on this speaking tour around the country. She was always on shows, talk shows, the news, everything else. And she's probably the one who the most successfully brought down and prevented the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. If you look at it, this is the wording. You can see some women marching in the 1970s, and they have Section 1 on their banner right there of the Equal Rights Amendment. Basically, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. So again, what does that mean? If we're all equal, do we all compete in the same sporting events? Are we all supposed to be able to perform the same at a job if we are a construction worker or something that requires physical labor? So a lot of women were kind of scratching their heads like, what does this mean? You know, because sometimes we have some advantages to being women. Okay, so despite that loss to the feminists, there were some real gains. I told you about this woman here. This is Bella Abzug, right? She was a Jewish woman from New York. She ran for Congress and she served representing the state of New York in the House of Representatives from 1977, or excuse me, from 71 to 77. She attempted to become senator, but she lost that job. Back in the 1970s, when nobody was really speaking about this, she was one of the first advocates for gay rights, right? Also, if you go back and you remember the Zionist movement, the movement for a Jewish homeland. Being Jewish, she was also an advocate for this. She ran for mayor of New York. She lost that. And she was one of the first people in Congress to call for the impeachment of Richard Nixon. Also leading the charge for women, for Black women, was the woman on the right here at the bottom. This is Shirley Chisholm. She's the first African American woman to be elected to Congress, right? So she served in Congress from 69 to 83. Right? Okay, a couple other slides and then we're finished. If you look, women have been entering the workforce. If you look at this one right here, top left, speech language pathologists, 98% women, dental assistants, 93% women, social workers. Those are kind of sort of fields that women feel nurturing, their tendency to be more nurturing. Physical therapists, 69%. Pharmacists, 60%. Women only make up, though, 36% of lawyers, 11% of civil engineers, and 1% of HVAC and refrigeration mechanical engineers. So these are fields that are now really open for women that might be some that you might be encouraged to get into. This slide right here shows women in management occupations. So if you look at them here, 74% of our human resource managers are women. Service managers, 71%. Education administration, 65. Food service managers, 46. But some of the other ones aren't so high. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that you go on now and take the video quiz. Talk to you soon. Bye.